Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar, What's Next in Big Data, the Sentient Enterprise. I'm Rich Colgard, publisher of Forbes magazine, where I write a featured column called Innovation Rules, and it is my pleasure to be hosting our presentation today. Now, before we begin the presentation, I would like to quickly bring your attention to a couple areas in the webinar council. One, there is a Q&A module. I encourage you to ask questions as they come to mind throughout the presentation. We will address these questions at the close of the presentation. Two, there are also icons at the bottom of your screen to explore. A, the resource links icon, which will allow you to download today's presentation, as well as other relevant materials. B, the share icons will allow you to send to a friend or push via social vehicles. And C, there is also a help button for assistance with any of the technical difficulties you might experience. Please hit F5 to refresh your console as a first step. If you'd like to review today's webinar at a later date, a recorded version will be sent to you via email this week. We'll also be sending you an invitation to the next webinar in our series where Mohan and Oliver will give you a deeper dive on the 5 stages of the Sentient Enterprise vision. I think we're ready to go. I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Mohan Sawhney is the McCormick Foundation Professor of Technology and the Director of the Center of Research and Technology at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. Professor Sawhney is a globally recognized scholar, teacher, consultant, and speaker in modern marketing, business innovation, and new media. He has written 6 books and dozens of influential articles. He has advised many of the leading technology companies as well as technology startup companies. He has been widely recognized as a thought leader. Businessweek named him as one of the 25 most influential people in e-business, and in 2012 he was named among the top 50 management thinkers of Indian origin. Oliver Ratzesberger, the Senior Vice President of Software at Teradata, where he leads software development teams for Teradata Labs, including the Teradata database, Teradata Aster, client tools, and Hadoop integration. Oliver joined Teradata in July 2013. Previously, he worked for Sears Holdings, where he drove a large analytics effort to consolidate disparate systems into a newly redefined unified data architecture. Before that, Oliver spent 7 years at eBay, where he was responsible for its data warehouse and big data platforms. During his tenure at eBay, he led eBay's expansion of analytics and led the Hadoop platform engineering teams, driving initial integration for Teradata and Hadoop. Well, welcome, Mohan and Oliver, and thank you for participating today. We have a lot of attendees just waiting to hear what you have to say. So I'd like to start out by asking you, and I'll go to Mohan first, and then Oliver can jump in. And the question is to take us behind the scenes on how you both came together to jointly build the vision of the Sentient Enterprise. And the question is, explain what the Sentient Enterprise means.
Thank you, Rich, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. So I have spent the last 20-some years working in the academic world, consulting for large and small technology companies, and have watched and also sit on the board of a company that is in the analytics space, worked closely with Teradata over the years, and have been really watching this evolution of analytics and big data with a lot of interest as I've advised companies. And I was really sort of questioning, where is this all headed? What does the journey look like, and what does it mean when an enterprise really starts to become, powered by analytics? Meanwhile, Oliver had been exploring in the trenches the same idea as he had actually seen the journey, the progressive evolution of analytics capabilities in the enterprise through his experiences at Sears and at eBay. And as we really met at a dinner.
Sounds like we have a little communications problem here. This is Oliver Ratzesberger. Let me jump in here, right? We had a dinner about 1.5 years ago where Mohan and I had the opportunity to exchange experiences in applying analytics and big data at corporations, and I went back probably the last 20 years in my career and explained to him the individual steps that we have taken to progress our capabilities and deliver new capabilities that allowed us to be faster, smarter, leverage data in more different ways than we had before. And we learned a lot about what worked and what didn't work in that period. And as we went through that conversation, as we had that dinner, it became pretty clear all of a sudden that we were talking about a maturity model, that we were talking about capabilities that you have to build that are less focused on what technologies or what technical features you implement or you turn on, but much more the cultural evolution, the change that you have to drive within an organization, within an enterprise, in order to leverage data and analytics at scale. Not in a department, not just for a particular use case, but end to end, when the board, when the C-level executives really can trust data to help them guide with decisions. And ultimately out of this multi-hour conversation and dinner became the journey that we ultimately titled the Sentient Enterprise. And we have been working for the last 1.5 years to detail out what it means to build that.
Oliver, sorry if I just lost the sound for a minute. So I just wanted to add to what Oliver was saying. As we talked about, one of the things that we sort of really start to grapple with is how do enterprises cope with all the data that's flowing in at ever-increasing speed. And we realize that the bottleneck is that humans don't scale the way data does. So the only way to make decisions at the speed of data is to really have a straight-through processing, if you will, where an enterprise is able to actually make decisions at scale almost autonomously without much human intervention. And as we began to talk about this idea, I said, wait a minute, isn't this like an organism that sort of senses and responds almost in real time? And that's when the sort of phrase struck us that this is when an enterprise achieves sentience, which is really the idea of autonomous decisioning at scale. So that became the North Star, or the guiding metaphor for the maturity model. So suddenly we had a journey, a maturity model, and a North Star, or an end state in view.
Yes, and it's important to just key in on that for a second here. The idea here is to give you a North Star, just like Six Sigma is to quality, right? Or zero inventory is to supply chain. The Sentient Enterprise is to advanced analytics adoption within enterprises. And we want to take you through that thinking, and this webinar is really about hitting home some of the big blocks in that Sentient Enterprise capability model. And why don't we take it into that, Rich?
Okay. Well, I think your overarching view of this is spot on, that big data is like an umbrella that sits over the whole organization, quite distinct from the era of discrete data that any given division or department in a company might use to get intelligence. But I want to ask you, what is the problem here? I mean, the potential of big data is huge, as you outlined, but most ideas would start with the goal of solving a problem. And what problem or problems are you solving with the use of big data and the concept of the sentient enterprise?
That's a great question. And by the way, let me just twist that question ever so slightly, or add on to it. It is of course about big data, but it all starts with regular data or small data, because what we are seeing today is we are in an economy, we are in a world that is evolving exponentially. Things get bigger, faster, in an ever-increasing speed. In the Sentient Enterprise, we often talk about terms like self-service everything or a real-time economy, right? Today, it's no longer good enough to go to a bank or a branch and do something, right? You don't even want to go to the ATM anymore if you can take a photo of your check and deposit it like that. And mobile devices and the internet have have led to an economy that is really on an exponential path, right? And with that, of course, data is exploding on us, right? But that leads to a lot of challenges within organizations that traditionally follow the typical waterfall models in terms of how to develop capabilities of all kinds. And data, small data or big data, is just an example of that, right? A lot of companies still go down the path of any problem starts with a requirements document that ultimately that gets fed into a design, into a data model, into ETL, into land data somewhere, into build BI dashboards, applications on top of that. And when you're in an exponentially moving world, you just don't have the time to go through that in that same way, right? And because of that, what we see is a lot of silos happening within companies. And what is happening because of that is people take matters in their own hands. They deploy their own little copies of data, right? We often refer to them as data marts. You can call them whatever you want. And by the way, it's not about technology. It's about if waterfall breaks down, if exponential evolution takes over, and people start saying, I need something in the next 2 days, in the next 10 days, in the next 30 days. And I sometimes hear quotes where people say, Agile is no longer fast enough for us. I cannot wait 30 days for something. I need something in a day or in a few hours. And when you get to that, and when people start matters into their own hands, they start copying things around. And quickly you find, and we've done studies at eBay and at other places, quickly you find that these copies of data start locking down up to 75% of your organization that are now chasing data, that are now searching for data, that are now trying to figure out why data is drifting, right? And we gave this a word at eBay where we called it data drift, where we said, every time you make a copy of data, it's by definition out of sync. And the effort to keep it in sync is much greater than people ultimately realize to do. And so quickly over time, you lock down more and more of your human capital dealing with that problem. Not even talking about data duplication that, all of a sudden you have 100 copies of data out there, which a lot of companies out there have that without realizing that, right? And so at eBay, we coined that phrase over the years where we said, a data mart cannot be cheap enough to justify its existence. And the problem for that was not the cost of data marts, because the problem with copies of data is the human element, it's the culture, it's the behavior, it's what it drives into an organization that makes you deal all of a sudden with the fact that the marketing data doesn't match the finance data. And if those two don't match, then in a boardroom, you have a conversation about how many active customers did we just have in Q1, and you get two wildly different numbers, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So what all of that waterfall behavior, what all of that planning, what all of that heavy duty, we build projects with data and we design them has led to is a false sense of agility that quite often turns into wild west within these companies. And this is really a key starting point for the Sentient Enterprise. We need to get good at that because big data doesn't make the life easier with regards to culture and agility. Big data is another explosion on top of that, and you need to be good with data no matter what scale you're at, and then take it into the big data area, right? Back to you, Rich.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that Peter Drucker once said, that you shouldn't solve problems, you should pursue opportunities. That's where your prime energy should go. And when you have data drifts occupying 75% of your time solving backwards problems, then you're prohibited by definition from pursuing opportunities. Well, let me ask, how does the Sentient Enterprise approach then begin to solve these problems?
Yeah, Rich, I can take that, and if you can move on to the slide that shows the evolution steps, and I can just very quickly give an overview of what we're talking about. So what we see here is sort of the maturity model that we referenced at the beginning. I'm going to give a very brief overview of this progression of the journey, and then I'll hand it over to Oliver, to sort of double click on what we're talking about. So essentially, as Oliver was just saying, that we are in a stage in most enterprises in the pursuit of agility end up with a anarchy, really, where you have fiefdoms of data and little pockets of automation and duplication of data and data drift and so on. So step one is to get this under control by building an Agile data warehouse. And here the key idea is to achieve a balance of centralization and decentralization, where you have essentially a data warehouse that is one version of the truth, but is built so that it can scale in an agile manner, so that you are now no longer having, you have one version of the data, and you're able to then use that consistently across the organization for your analytics. So that sort of first is to achieve sort of the balance between centralization and decentralization, and to sort of bring governance, to balance governance with agility. But moving on, sort of the next stage beyond this is that the problem gets worse, because now the data is not only related to transactions. The data now is related to interactions. The data is related to patterns in behavior. And the behavioral data really gives you a much richer understanding of what people might do, because behavior is predictive. So the next step is to actually move from analyzing transactions to be able to actually model behavioral data that is in some sense 100 times more complex and has interrelated patterns that one needs to kind of glean. So that's sort of the stage two. Now stage three is you realize that if you want to really understand the patterns, then it's not, you now cannot have individuals just looking at the analytics. You now need to bring in the power of crowdsourcing, the power of collaboration, and to start to build communities around data. This is what we call the collaborative ideation platform. Think of it sort of as a LinkedIn for analytics. Now beyond this, once you've got the power of crowdsourcing, you also then, and as you go to the next stage, you realize that in order for decisions to scale, people need to be able to run their own analysis. They need to move towards this idea that we were talking about earlier, that everything is self-serve. So it's self-serve analytics. So self-serve analytics is the next level, where you build an analytical application platform that allows people to actually take matters into their own hands, but take matters into their own hands only as far as applications are concerned, while running off of a common platform. And beyond this, what then you realize is that now the bottleneck is the people in the process. So you need to free people up from the mundane decisions, from the mundane tasks of data analysis, and free them up for higher order decision making. So this is the final stage in the evolution, the building of an autonomous decisioning platform, which allows you to essentially do straight through decision making and processing. And this is akin to what's happening in the trading algorithm world. This is akin to what's happening in the autonomous automobile world. So where you can sort of essentially move the decision making to the higher level and have automated decisioning. And this finally evolves towards the Sentient Enterprise, which really is an enterprise that behaves like an organism, that is able to adapt, evolve, listen to data, and make decisions at scale in near real time. So that is the overview of the 5 stages in the capability maturity model and leading up to the Sentient Enterprise, which is the sort of ideal state, the Six Sigma of analytics, if you will, as Oliver had described. Oliver, comments on the maturity model?
Yeah. By the way, Mohan, thank you so much for that wonderful overview. The one point I wanted to make is, and we said we're going to start out with the Agile data warehouse, and we were very careful how we named these stages, right? And the Agile data warehouse is a little bit of that. It's meant to be an oxymoron almost, right? Because by definition, the data warehouse in most companies is not agile, right? And we have not, as an industry, cracked that how to make it agile. And it's so important to change that, because what comes after that gets so much more difficult if you can't be agile with small data. And so it's really important to focus with the first stage in that Sentient Enterprise on the foundations of agility. and everything that comes after that really builds on top of that. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail what that means, and we'll dive especially more into the details of some of these stages in the follow-up sections here as we go through some of the more details. Rich?
Yeah, well, how does, this is really wonderful because I think it's such a great overview of what you mean and how the stages to go about accomplishing what really you want is this living organism of an organization. But let's go back to step one, and how does step one, using the Agile data warehouse, empower people to ask new or deeper set of questions than they've been able to before?
Yeah, that's really the key part. And when we jump into it, again, I'd like to take it back to almost the inverse. In today's world, the data warehouse is not agile, right? I mean, I would argue that in 99.9% of companies that I've met around the world, agility and data warehouse don't go together. And because of that, business units and departments and development teams really have no choice but to take matters into their own hands. And what do is, well, they build their own little silos, right? They build their own little data marts. I need something in 30 days. You know what, I can afford a little database, a little cluster of some sort. And by the way, it doesn't matter at all what technology that you use. If you do these copies of data, these silos of data, these data marts for agility reason, you're usually heading down a path of copy some data, give it to me quickly, put it in there, I'm in control, I can do what I need to do. The problem then becomes that data drift. And it was around 2004, 2005 at eBay when we started realizing, you know, this is kind of a negative self-fulfilling prophecy here. The more we do of those things, the harder it gets, and the more we lock down our people, and the more we have fire drills chasing down why data is incorrect within the company. And we started realizing we cannot sustain that. We cannot, as a company, survive hundreds of copies of data that all are out of sync, because people will show up at decision makings with incorrect data and will guide the company in the wrong direction. So we said, what do we as a technology organization have to build that allows that the concept of decentralized use cases of data that can be run at the speed of thought, right, while not creating copies of data? And the concept that we created back then was the concept of what we initially called virtual data marts. We said, you know what? We need the equivalent of sandboxing. We need the equivalent of what we nowadays call data labs, that anybody within the company that has an idea Monday morning, 8 a.m., needs to be able to go to a self-service webpage and say, I need my own sandbox, I need my own data lab. And the SLA that we set up was like, in 5 minutes or less, you need to have your data lab. And the initial thought back then was like, well, we're starting to talk more about cloud. Let's just put databases in the cloud. We can provision them very quickly. And if we do that, then, we have solved the problem. And then we challenged ourselves on that thinking. We said, well, what's the first thing that you see when you open up that database in the cloud, when you open it up? And the answer was, well, nothing. It's empty, right? You need to copy data there. And it's like, well, that doesn't solve the problem. We just solved the problem of provisioning a box, which is not the real problem. The problem is the copies of data and dealing with that. And we said, we need to have a different concept. We need to have sandboxes that the moment you open the sandbox, it must contain all of the corporate's data that you or your team are allowed to see, right? Of course, you need to adhere to security policies and to confidentiality and to PII rules and whatnot. But whatever you are allowed to see must be there that very moment you provision that sandbox. And that's a crucial aspect, because only then can you deal with that. At the same point in time, we also realized from the get-go that this is not just a file system where we give people individual directories. And if you've ever looked at file servers that had open directories, you know what happens 6 months down the path or a year. They're full with millions of tables of files that nobody knows anymore where they came from. So we also started realizing governance and self-service have to go very, very close together. We have to interweave these things. We have to build them into each other if we want to be successful. So we said a sandbox must by default be time-boxed. You get it for 30, 60, or 90 days. And it will tell you when it's about to expire. You can extend it easily, right, through self-service. But if you do this more than 2 or 3 times, Probably you should be on a list of interesting self-service users that some of the architects should start talking to and say, you know what, how can we help you evolve that, right? At the same point in time, you need to do things like analytics on analytics. You need to build the capability to follow along what people are doing with self-service. Just handing somebody a self-service tool is just like saying, I have a web page and I ignore the clickstream on that. You cannot afford that, right? The moment you do self-service, you need to follow along what people are doing. You need to have analytics about that. And this is just behavioral analytics by itself, right? That you need to do for any self-service component so that you can see what patterns are emerging out there, what teams in their different data labs and sandboxes are doing similar things, and how can I ultimately leverage that in the stages to come to make the organization, the enterprise, smarter than what it is today. So that was one tool, and I want to be very clear. The virtual data marts, the sandboxes, are not the solution to agility. They're one important tool. They are about to replace a ticket that needs to spawn another ticket that DBAs have to create tables for you. This is really about decentralizing use cases, but keeping the data as centralized as possible and drive everything against one set of data instead of copies of data. The second tool in our quest for agility that we developed, we call the layered data architecture. And by the way, the layered data architecture is meant to be a logical breakdown of data, not by systems. By the way, you can build this on a single system as small as a laptop, or you can build this on a very complex infrastructure with thousands or tens of thousands of servers. The layered data architecture borrows concept from the telecommunications OSI 7-layer model, where it says, let's break down what data means and how we use it so that we build more simplistic, smaller solutions rather than the spaghetti code of ETL that we have built in the past. And that layered data architecture starts with layer 0, raw data. This is where you want to keep data one-to-one to where it came from. And the very important thing here is, however, this is where ETL happens without a T. Data that goes into layer 0 must not be transformed, with very few exceptions, because the first step of lineage for you to establish within the company is like, where did the data come from, and how did it look like before I start massaging it? However, the other important lesson learned that we did is when we first thought we're just going to throw everything into text files, we very quickly started realizing that where there is structure, we must preserve structure, right? You cannot unstructure everything and just dump it into text files and then make it up to every other process to interpret what that is. When data comes out of a database, when data comes out of another system, and it has already structure, it's important to keep not just the raw data, but the structure as it is. Very important step. And then on top of that, we have the integration layer. This is where I think we as an industry have sometimes overdone a little bit how we did data modeling and whatnot. This is really about get the keys right. We introduced concepts like semi-structured data modeling, where we said very well-known pieces need to be modeled, need to be maintained, need to be governed. But newer sets of data, more unknown sets of data, we are even okay to keep name value pairs, JSON, XML within a data model. We don't want to over-model it to begin with, because we just don't know how it's being used in later stages of its life cycle anyway. On top of that sits the calculation layer. Again, every calculation, every KPI, every model needs to be in there. The mistake we made at times was to stick things into downstream apps, BI tools, data mining tools. All of them give you the ability to create formulas, right? And to say, oh, revenue is this equals this minus this times that. The problem is the moment you put this into a downstream system or downstream application, if somebody happens to come with something like Excel and looks at your data, they don't have the calculation. So what do? They make up the calculation. And in more cases than not, they come up with the wrong calculation, right? And so even though they look at the same data, if you calculate it in the wrong way, you're just as bad off as looking at bad data. Aggregation layer is now that you have the foundation in place, now that you have the calculation in place, this is where you roll it up by microsegment, by product categories, by geography, by business units, in the end, it's the same data structured in slightly different ways for different vantage points that you need to look at the data. And on top of that sits a presentation layer. This is how you present it to the organization. And this is really an abstraction away so that allows us to be agile underneath it, yet keep an interface, an API for the rest of the company consistent over time without changing it on the fly to our business partners. And then Data Labs, the self-service tool that sits all the way on top. What's really important is that overlaid on top that you see where you see different user groups getting access to different layers in the layered data architecture. And the names that we use here for the user groups are just examples. Whether it's data scientists or whether it's your most advanced data architects, data engineers, it's about there are a handful of people in every company that need to be able to go all the way down to the raw data, right? That's probably a very small percentage of your organization, but it's a very critical population of a company. And this is where if you build a layered data architecture like that, and if you instrument it, this is where you want to get to latencies of a few hours from an idea to get data into layer 0 to in the afternoon, I'm going to start looking at that data with my most experienced people. On the other extreme, there's probably also a lot of users within the company that should never ever get close to raw data, because if they get lost in there, they can do more harm than good. And so you see how different users are stacked up on different levels in that layered data architecture, and it really helped us structure agile projects in very new ways. We started with what we said before, the data labs, the sandboxes, the virtual data marts. We layered the layered data architecture on top of that, and all of a sudden, a Scrum team of 7 people could get data into layer 0 within a matter of hours, could start integration of that data in a matter of days, and really start produce output in every sprint that we work on, not 3 months from now, not 9 months from now, not 18 months before we see the first thing. So there's a couple of concepts, and again, I'm just touching on the high-level ones, that have to come together to become good with agility. And 2 of the key points are what we just discussed, the virtual data mart / data labs and the layered data architecture from a logical point of view of how to structure agility with data. Back to you, Rich.
Yeah, well, I think it's so interesting the way you properly described people's ability within an organization to be able to use raw data and other people needing various levels of interpretation, which leads to the question, can you talk about the human factors and what this has to do with analytics in an organization?
Yeah, and this is a key problem, right? Because as you build for more agility, as you build more capabilities, and you mix now the human element into this, it gets increasingly difficult. Again, the data warehouse went down that path of waterfall, applying waterfall methodologies and becoming slow. Part of that was metadata really never lived up to its name, right? And the more you build for agility, just like the traditional data warehouse can't keep up with it, traditional concepts of metadata can't keep up with it. So what if you load clickstream data into your agile environment that comes with 60,000 tags of a web page? You can't ever model that. You cannot ever have enough metadata people to describe what these tags are, because these tags are in itself crowdsourced. They come from all the development teams of your company that are working on that, and all the business units, all the departments. And for some companies, crowdsourcing goes, of course, far beyond just the enterprise and into the user base. Right? And eBay has this huge opportunity, but also this problem. I mean, the sellers who are listing items are the ones describing what a product looks like. You have the ultimate crowdsourcing of product descriptions. Having said that, you have the ultimate lack of governance because of that. If millions of people are listing their own descriptions, you quickly realize that you can never put governance around it in traditional terms. You can never build a metadata concept. Therefore, we need to take on crowdsourcing and collaboration, bring it to the data. This is when we built the Data Hub at eBay. Data Hub as a web page, similar to what GitHub is to developers or what LinkedIn is to your job network. We said we need to bring people together. We need to enable crowdsourcing within an organization. and bring people that work on similar problems together naturally through crowdsourcing rather than through metadata. And ultimately, we decided, metadata, there's a very, very small part that can be solved with it. Much more of it is collaboration and crowdsourcing. And by the way, we didn't invent that, right? I mean, there's a lot of these examples out there that where crowdsourcing has really become a new way of thinking about how to solve problems at scale. And we just need to think of enterprises. When you bring 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 employees together, you need to think in terms of crowdsourcing in order to be successful. And I mean, successful companies like Netflix have gone down that path and combined that even with gamification years ago, right? I mean, the famous Netflix prize, $1 million for any team that builds us a better algorithm that can predict what the next movie is that somebody will want to watch better than X% than our own algorithm can. And these are the kinds of concepts that we really need to adopt within organizations if we want to be successful. Because as you turn up the contrast, as you turn up agility, as you go into more and more behavioral analytics, the explosion of big data is not just that the incoming data volumes explode, it's also that the concepts, the interactions, the models you build within the company explode. So you are exploding on multiple dimensions, and traditional concepts in data warehousing and data modeling and metadata simply cannot keep up with that. You need to crowdsource that, and you need to build a platform that can deal with that, and you need to be able to ultimately say, people that looked at that data set also looked at the following data sets, right? You need to be able to merchandise information, just like you see on your favorite retail website that says people that buy this also buy these things, because you need to assume that somebody new in the organization doesn't even know what to ask for. And once you find and see what they're looking at, you need to bring in other aspects, and this is where crowdsourcing really is the way to enable that within an enterprise.
I have a question for Mohan, and both of you talked about the concept of autonomous decision making, and explain more how that fits into the picture, and what is sort of the intersection between crowdsourcing and autonomous decisioning? I mean, how do those two really come together?
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about the first part, and then Oliver can talk about how these two come together. I think autonomous decisioning is best perhaps illustrated with an example. If you look at what Tesla is doing with the automobile, I mean, they're really, I think, creating a new paradigm for how humans interact with automobiles. The car today that Tesla produces has software and sensors that essentially allow it to increasingly take over some of the mundane functions that a driver needs to do. I mean, today the car can do adaptive cruise control, the car can read street signs, and soon it will be able to park itself and drive highway to highway and eventually drive all by itself. Now, what that still means is that there is still a driver. The driver needs to decide where the car is going to go, what the purpose of the trip is. So these are the higher order functions that they still need to perform, but the algorithms and the sensors in the car are much better at looking 60 times a second to see if there's a blind spot, if there's an object. So this way, what autonomous decisioning really is about is to free up the people to make the more strategic decisions, to actually design the algorithms and to take the higher order decisions, but to free up the cognitive capacity for the more sort of mundane decisions. And the reason you need to make this separation is that you simply cannot keep up with the speed of data. Decision making, if it is left only to people, will never scale at the rate at which data is flowing into the enterprise. So that's really the idea. And as far as sort of where crowdsourcing, and autonomous decisioning is connected, let me turn to Oliver to sort of talk about that evolution.
And I want to take us one step back to answer that question better, because what we see in a lot of organizations is this typical model of, for us even to integrate data, right? We have a lot of people that are interested in data, but we go to a handful of ETL developers, right? And call them whatever they are called in your organization. And we always are after the fact, right? Analytics are a thing that we often roll out new products, new capabilities, new campaigns. And the moment we roll it out, the first question is, so how did we do? And then people are scrambling all of a sudden. Well, we haven't done the analytics part of it, right? We just delivered the product. It's like, that obviously needs to change. But as you change that, we found that an important part to autonomous decisioning is the ability to do enterprise data listening. And so we built the capability to, instead of doing data integration after the fact with typical, drill a hole into a mountain of data, suck data out, do something with it, we said we need a autonomous platform that can listen to data at enterprise scale, where any part of the business, any new app, any new iPhone application, web application, email campaign, a CRM module, whatever, can point their data at, and the analytics platform can listen to it in real time and absorb that data. It's a really important capability because as we go into that autonomous decisioning making, you only get to that point where you treat the enterprise as a lot of sensors, right? The reason Mohan talks about something like Tesla is it's a software platform, it's an app platform that is equipped with very advanced sensors that constantly, where the platform constantly listens to its data and makes decisions in real time. And to build that capability, we need to build a listening platform into every organization, every enterprise in the world out there, because we need to cut out that latency, right? New data as it appears needs to be collected and listened to from the very first microsecond it happens, not 3 months later, not 18 months later, right? When we get to it, when our roadmaps and our processes allow us to do that. And again, a lot of self-service needs to be built into this. A lot of governance needs to be built into this. This is really where app platforming, DevOps need to come much, much closer to analytics than what we have done over the years, right? We have used DevOps in cloud, right? How do we run 10,000 servers in a cloud with 5 people? We need to do the same thing. How do we run 10,000 elements of data with less than 5 people in an organization, right? And so there is concepts of DevOps that need to be brought in here that allow us to now listen to data, deposit data into layer 0, give certain users within an organization access to that, and then build autonomous decisioning models on it. Because ultimately, we cannot look at enough intersections of data with human beings to make sense out of it. And this is where the autonomous decisioning comes in. We have a couple more slides to talk about that. Rich.
Yeah, well, what you're describing really sounds like almost a living organism, a human being with a brain and a nervous system. So is that the end state? Can you explain, is that your concept of a company as a single organism?
Yeah, I think, Rich, that's a good way to put it, because the idea of, I think I'll break the words into single and organism, right? So single is the idea that you behave as one. And you behave as one because you have, the virtual data marts hanging off of a single version of the truth, the Agile data warehouse. And that you have, a community built around the analytics, and you have a self-serve analytics platform. So that's the idea of the organization acting as one in a unified fashion, without regard to silos, without regard to functions, and so on. So that's the single part of it. The organism part of it is, what does an organism really do? An organism has sensing organs. We have our 5 senses. And those sensing organs then provide information to our nervous system, which then, and our brain, and then we interpret and process the decision, and then take the actions, and then those actions are communicated through our acting organs. So really it's a sense and respond loop that really defines a living being. It's constantly sensing and responding to threats in the environment or events in the environment. And that is the autonomous decisioning capability. That's the sort of organic part or organism part of the Sentient Enterprise idea. The fact that you can do essentially and by the way, as Oliver was describing the data listening platform, that is nothing but the sensing organ, right? That's how you have to be able to consume the data, and really plug into the data streams in real time. But then you have to take it all the way to, the analytics that is performed on the data, the decisions that are taken, so that then at the end of the day, what you have is an enterprise that we call the Sentient Enterprise that has 5 key capabilities. One is that it is frictionless. I mean, this idea of straight-through processing, straight-through decisioning, decisioning taken, really without any friction, any regard to silos. So that's the first characteristic. It's scalable. Scalable meaning that no matter what the speed at which and the volume and the variety of data that's coming in, that decision-making can scale. Today, we allow databases to scale. We allow platforms to scale, but we are talking about how you scale decisioning, and that's the scalable aspect. The proactive aspect is the fact that when you build the intelligence that goes beyond analysis of the past, you can also start to now do predictive and go beyond predictive to what we call anticipatory analytics, where you can actually predict and anticipate what is going to happen. So you don't wait till you respond, you are actually proactive. Evolving is the idea that the algorithms and the decisioning capability gets smarter over time. There's an evolutionary aspect to the intelligence. And autonomous is the notion that human intervention can be taken out of many of the decisions so that you can then make decisions at the speed of data. So these are the 5 key sort of attributes or features of this rather admittedly idealistic and futuristic vision of the Sentient Enterprise. So if you ask me, is there a Sentient Enterprise in existence today? I'd say no. But this is the North Star. This is where we are evolving to. This is the journey that we all need to be on. And I hope we've been able to paint a picture of the 5-step capability maturity model, dive deep into each of those stages and the capabilities and the shift that it represents, and also paint a vivid picture for you as to where this all leads and what the North Star or the ideal state of the evolution of analytics capabilities in the enterprise is.
Well, I think it sounds to me like a goal that's very consistent with the way the technology is evolving. But now I'd like to move to audience questions. And the first question, I think, is a very practical one, and it comes from somebody in an IT department, and that is, it's often the case that IT departments inside of organizations are in a break-and-fix mode. They're struggling to keep their heads above water. How would you address the issue of this, and how IT people can kind of both take care of the day-to-day responsibilities that they have, but also create enough space in their own time, in their organization's own time, so that they can start thinking about these larger issues that you've presented?
This is a great question. This goes back to the key problems that many technology and IT teams around the world are facing every day, right? We are so tactical. We have so much on our plate. Our roadmaps are so overbooked. We are so, not delivering to what we already need to deliver, and now we should change, right? And you really have to make this a goal for the enterprise and for the company. And what I can talk to in terms of personal experience, I always looked at this as I need to treat this as if I was a startup company in the open market. I need to behave as a startup company that develops new capabilities to stay relevant or to become relevant within an organization, right? And this starts with, how do I brand that team? How do I set ourselves up? How do I represent ourselves? Where do I need to be to sell these kind of services and capabilities? What is my webpage? What is my newsletter? Am I looking more modern? Am I looking more capable than anything else out there in the market? Or is there better opportunities out there? And if there are better other companies outside of our own at doing what needs to be done here, then I shouldn't be surprised if I have a hard time convincing business partners to come along with me, right? So it's really important for the leadership of who owns analytical capabilities on the technology side to treat this as if this was a startup company with investment, and you need to take this out to the market, and the market is the enterprise. The market are the business units that need to ultimately see your vision, understand your vision, see the roadmap, see the tools, and you need to take barriers, walls down in order to work very closely with that, whether that is a board of advisors with your most influential business units, whether that is all the self-service tools, whether that is even small things like what is your web page, right? I mean, where's your Q&A forums? Where can I ask a question? Where do I get my newsletter about new things that are happening? Who is telling me about what is happening? Really important to take that business thinking into IT and say, I'm a startup within the company. I need to treat it as such. I need to drive agility. I need to drive self-service tools, and I need to drive branding around that and delivery and lead with examples. And by the way, this will not happen overnight, right? You don't establish a brand overnight. You don't establish a track record overnight. You don't become agile overnight. But the longer you push out doing it, the more difficult it will become. And I've seen even from large legacy corporations, if you really decide we're going to do that, in 90 days, you can absolutely make progress. You can have that website up. You can have the first insights about data in self-service tools. You can have data labs up and running. You can have a newsletter around data up and running. And it's really treating this with an urgency and with a sense of, I need to do it today. I cannot wait until next week in order to become that cornerstone around agility that is basically, yes, driven out of a technology team that needs to think very progressively and really drive this inside of the organization.
Here's a great question from the audience. When you say decision making, are you talking about operational decision making? And when we talk about crowdsourcing and autonomous decisioning, the questioner says one must take into consideration the impact of a wrong decision on the enterprise, that various decisions have different risk-reward equations attached to them.
Yes, let me take the first part of that. Yes, we are talking about operational decisions, but it's to give you an example. Let's say that you've got an electricity grid, and in that electricity grid, you have to inject power from an external source into different nodes. Now, the node through which you need to inject the power will depend on the seasonality, the load patterns, and so on and so forth. So the decision on how to optimize that grid, how to make those specific, decisions on, point-by-point optimization, whether that's a water grid or an energy grid or whatever, that's operational optimization in real time. So it is operational decision-making, but it is not about transactional decisioning. It is really about analytical decisioning. It's about making optimization decisions. Similarly, it could be decisions related to pricing or discounts or, real-time segmentation. So I think that sometimes we make a distinction between, operational CRM and analytical CRM. So I think that's a false distinction anymore now. But what I want to emphasize that this is not, routine decision. This is actually analytical decisioning that is done in the day-to-day operations at scale.
Here's another great one from the audience. How would companies do proof of concept testing as they make the necessary steps to adapt to the sentient enterprises?
Now, an important step that ties this question together with the second part of the last question is a proof of concept or the angst of failure or a wrong decision, right? I mean, it is very important when we become agile that we adapt and embrace philosophies like fail fast, right? The fact is no matter how much governance we put in place, no matter how good we plan for everything, there's always a chance of failure, right? A wrong decision, something not living up to the outcome that we were hoping for it. The problem is if you do them very infrequently, you never get good at that, right? If you make very big decisions on very long intervals, or you do them once a year or once every 6 months, you don't get good at that. You need to be enabling an organization to deploy or try something 100 times a day. You need to be able to make mistakes and quickly recover from them and correct them. You need to be able to, and this proof of concept, this really plays towards concepts like Experimentation Platform, right? In 2007, 2008, we established an experimentation platform at eBay where all of a sudden decisions on how to change algorithms, on how to change modules on web pages weren't purely based by human beings anymore to say, you know, I like the button in green better than in blue, therefore we're going to go with that. It became an experimentation platform where we said we need to measure and we need to do multivariate testing, right? We need to try out different versions of it and then pick the one that has the most likelihood to succeed. And this embraces a little bit this whole concept of fail fast. And again, we need to get to a real-time decision platform. We need to get to autonomous decisioning. And yes, we need to be prepared that some decisions will be wrong and some decisions will cause the inverse of what we were hoping to do. But unless we try it out, we quite never know. But what we need to get good at with the Sentient Enterprise is to deal with that, to be prepared with it. I pushed the wrong button. So what do I do now? It can't result in a tailspin. It can't result in a knee-jerk reaction, right? It needs to be, okay, this didn't work out. Roll back, go to the other thing, and do it as fast as you made the first decision. And only then can you learn, right? And take yourself when you were a small child. You made a lot of incorrect decisions, even walking. We fall a lot when we are a 4-year-old and 3-year-old, right? But we learn every time, and it's important that when we talk about the Sentient Enterprise, every experience, good or bad, is a learning experience, and the concept of fail fast needs to be baked into every proof of concept, every experiment, and every decision that we drive from this platform.
Well, I have a final question for you, either one of you or both. I think, Oliver, you appropriately talk about how companies need to develop more of a startup mentality, and you were at eBay when it was in its fast growth period. But what if you're a pharmaceutical company or a defense contractor or somebody that is more highly regulated? How do you incorporate autonomous decision making in such an organization, or is it simply going to be necessary to carve out areas of regulation, say these are governed under a different decision-making process?
Well, I mean, I'll quickly respond, and then maybe Oliver can chime in. The decisions we're talking about are decisions that you make, thousands and thousands of small decisions that you make. We're not talking about the design of a fighter jet or, the regulatory testing of a drug, and we're not suggesting bypassing the FDA process or bypassing the RFP process, for the DoD. What we're saying is that, and by the way, this is also true that, in most companies, Waterfall and Agile coexist. It's not all Agile, so you need to find ways to blend these approaches and to dot the I's and cross the T's where you need to from a regulatory standpoint. But within that larger strategic, agenda, there are thousands of little, component parts and, then design decisions and operational optimization and marketing decisions that every pharmaceutical company or every, even large defense contractor needs to make in its day-to-day operations. So it's really, literally millions of small decisions we're talking about, and not, how to do the clinical trial on a drug.
Yeah, this is perfectly it, right? I mean, we have emphasized very heavy on agility here, of course, right? And it's a foundation to become good with data. But you also need to realize how far you can take agility. And that will certainly vary from enterprise to enterprise, right? I absolutely believe that in every business, in every industry, there are agile parts to making decisions, to doing the operational ones. But there is also things that you will not do in Agile, right? And we've learned the hard way over years what projects work well in Agile and which ones don't. You don't build a data center in Agile, right? You don't upgrade a priority zero system in Agile. You don't do that. There's a process to be followed, and you get quality and repeatability out of that. But there's aspects of whenever you deal with new data, whenever you deal with new patterns, whenever you deal with the unknown, right, in data, that's where agility really, really helps a lot. Because whenever you couple unknown with requirements documents, then you get the typical, well, I don't know what I want. Give me all data in all possible combinations. Build me all dashboards with all drill downs. And this is how we end up with 18 months, 36 months projects for something that could be as small as a single data feed, 2 tables, and a decision being made very quickly, right? And so structure, waterfall, where repeatability, where quality is the top dimension that you need to follow, or where regulation it is, right? And agility, where you deal with unknown, where you deal with research, where you deal with, I just don't know what the data will tell me, therefore I can't spec it out before I see the data, right? And this is where Agile then works. So for every company, it will be a blend. And this is something that as you adopt agility, as you bring in these tools, every company needs to find the sweet spot where what projects can be run to what level in Agile versus in more traditional models.
Well, gentlemen, I would like to thank both of you for today's really illuminating webinar. We've had a ton of great questions pour in, and we were unable to answer all of them, but we will make sure that all questions are received in a follow-up. So if you'd like to review today's webinar at a later date, a recorded version will be sent to you by email this week. We'll also be sending you an invitation to the next webinar in our series, where Mohan and Oliver will give you a deeper dive on the 5 stages of the Sentient Enterprise vision. So thank you speakers, and thank you attendees for your participation today.